Good morning and welcome back to another Running Tales podcast, where we attempt to tell the extraordinary stories of everyday runners. I'm Craig Lewis, and with my wife Michelle, we've spoken to a host of runners, from those using parkrun for weight loss or to combat mental health issues, to Olympians and running coaches. If you want to learn more about what we do, you can find us on social media, on Twitter at Running Tales Pod, on Instagram at the same handle, on Facebook as Running Tales, or you can check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@runningtalespod, where the @ is the @ sign rather than spelt out. We've also just started a Substack newsletter, so please check that out at runningtales.substack.com. Anyway, enough of all that, on with the important stuff. This week's guest is Tony Collier. Despite starting the sport later in life, Tony swiftly became a strong runner, not only clocking sub-20-minute parkruns, but also completing a host of marathons and the 55-mile Comrades Ultra. But it was while preparing to do the back-to-back Comrades when he received the shocking news that he had incurable prostate cancer. That was more than 5 years ago, and Tony hasn't stopped running, while also becoming an ambassador raising awareness of prostate cancer, something which has gained him recent recognition.
It was the Northwest Cancer Awards, and I won the award for the Champion Awareness Raiser. Since I was diagnosed with advanced stage prostate cancer 5.5 years ago, I decided to take it upon myself to make sure as few men as possible end up like me. So I'm a Prostate Cancer UK awareness speaker. I do lots of awareness talks. I've done lots of running club talks, actually. I talk about my running history and how running led to my diagnosis. So that was the basis of the award last night. It was a real thrill, a nice posh black tie event, and nice to walk away with a trophy.
Yeah, that was fantastic. Really good to see you get that, and I think it speaks to all the sort of work that you do and everything that you've achieved. I know that running has really been sort of central to your journey, hasn't it? How did you sort of first get into running?
It's interesting. I started running when I was 45 because of a health issue, which is a little bit ironic given where I currently am. I was sent for medical by the firm I work for, and they said I was borderline clinically obese and my blood pressure was so high that I'd be on drugs the rest of my life if I didn't do something about it. And I thought I was really fit because I used to play table tennis just below county standard 3 times a week and a bit of social squash. So obviously I wasn't fit enough. So the place where I played squash had a little informal running club. And I thought, well, I'll see if I can keep up with them. And I turned up and ran with them a couple of times, and it grew from there. And about 2 years later, I was one of the founder members of Style Running Club, where I am now the coach and development officer.
Did you sort of enjoy running straight away?
I'm not sure I really enjoyed it. I actually thought 10K was a nice distance. It was far enough. And I swore I would never, ever run a marathon. And then, God, what happened after that?
We always get stuck in that. We always start saying it's 5Ks and 10Ks, and then suddenly, before we know it as runners, we're doing all these strange events and amazing distances.
Absolutely.
For you, how far did your running journey progress at that stage? Because I know you've done an awful lot since the diagnosis, but I think you did quite a lot of running beforehand as well, didn't you?
Yeah, I started running when I was 45, and I started running probably to a reasonably high level in my late 40s. And I ran my first marathon when I was 50. And it was the Amsterdam Marathon 2007. And 8 of our club members decided that now we were a proper running club, we should all have a marathon on our CV. So 8 of us entered the Amsterdam Marathon, and one by one, 7 of them dropped out down to the half marathon, leaving Billy no mates running the marathon on his jack. Charming. And so that was my first marathon, and I have to say I ran it like a complete scaredy cat. I was terrified of the distance, but actually when I sort of sat back and reflected, I said never again immediately afterwards, like we all do. But I ran 3:37, which as a 50-year-old who'd only ever done one marathon, I thought was pretty reasonable. And so it sort of started from there. And then my next marathon was Chicago, which was unknowingly to me was the first of my world marathon majors. But it was my friend's last of his 5 marathon majors at the time, and his wife bought him a certificate of his world majors of feats, and it framed with all these medals, and I was just completely utterly envious of it. And so I set out to try to achieve what he'd achieved, and then by the time I got to achieving the world marathon majors completion, they'd added Tokyo, which made it about 15 grand more expensive.
Yeah, and quite a trip out there. For those who kind of don't know, do you want to just quickly say what that is in terms of the majors? I think most runners do, but in case they don't.
6 world marathon majors: Chicago, New York, and Boston, Tokyo, London, and Berlin. And easily my favourite of them all was Boston, which I think is just such an incredibly iconic race. London is easily the best for crowd support. Berlin is easily the most boring. It's incredibly flat and very fast.
The fast one, as we keep seeing with Mr. Kipchoge.
Absolutely. Yeah, blasting around. And then Tokyo is exactly what you'd expect of Japan, very exotic, very, very unusual marathon, but very adorable. And you run around lots of amazing sights. And I went on to run, I averaged 3:27 for the World Majors and had a best of 3:24 at Boston, actually qualifying for Boston whilst running Boston. And, you know, it was such a fantastic achievement. I went on to do 19 marathons before my diagnosis and had a best of 3:23 so all those were in my mid-50s. So I got to a reasonably high standard for, someone in mid-50s. I was never going to be elite. I knew I was never elite, but I wasn't bad.
Yeah, I mean, those are some pretty good times, to be honest, especially without being rude about it, the sort of post, after 45 into your 50s to be clocking 3:20s, and even to qualify for Boston is you're getting some pretty good times there. So was that something that came to you naturally?
I found that I was actually quite a good endurance runner. I think it's probably because I had such a high pain threshold. And I think, the best runners, I think, are the ones who can actually run when it gets really, really tough. And I just found I had a really high pain threshold. And so I could actually overcome feeling completely shot. And, you get to the 20-mile mark and the second race of a marathon starts. And I just found that I was actually, really strong as an endurance runner.
Oh, you definitely have to teach me that one, Tony, because that last that last 10K is always horrible for me.
I use mental imagery, and my mental imagery was a 10K that I've done locally, which my club did a 10K route most weeks. And I just thought of myself, all you've got to do is run to the toilets and back, and that was it, And now I'm halfway to the toilets. Now I'm at the toilets. Now I'm halfway back, and then I've done. And so I just completely visualized the last 10K for me. It was the way I could deal with it, and I'd stop worrying about the pain. I did have some marathons where it was awful. I'm sure we all have.
Yeah.
But generally, if I was running well, I was running very well, and I got quite good at it.
And I think you went beyond just the normal 26.2 and went over to South Africa and did a certain race over there.
Yeah, that became a bucket list item, and it's a really interesting story because I met a little old lady on a walking holiday in the Italian Dolomites, and it turned out that she was a runner, and I got chatting to her about her running life, and she said she'd started running when she was 59, and when she was just over 60, she was like British national champion at all distances, and she's a real latecomer to running. So I said to her, "What's your favourite race?" And she said, "Comrades." And I'd never even heard of Comrades. So she explained to me about this race that was to commemorate the fallen heroes of the First World War. And it was in South Africa, and it was 56 miles, and it was 6,500 feet of climbing in the up year from Durban to Pietermaritzburg. And it was always 28 degrees or 30 degrees. And I thought, it's a really good idea to do that. Yes, you do. So it became a massive bucket list item for me, and I entered in 2015. Unfortunately, I picked up an IT band injury on both knees about 6 weeks before the race, and I knew I wasn't going to finish, but I desperately wanted to start. I was doing it for a charity, children's charity, so I had to start, and I got to about 20 miles and had to pull out in agony. I went back in 2016 to have another go and completed it in 9 hours 46. Which was 2 back-to-back 4.5-hour marathons and the slowest crawl through the streets of Durban for the last 5K imaginable. And it finished in the Kingsmead Cricket Stadium, and it was just unbelievable. And then I decided, if you do 1 year, it runs from Durban to Pietermaritzburg, that's the up year. The following year is the down year. So you run from Pietermaritzburg to Durban. And if you do a back-to-back up or down or up, you get a special back-to-back medal. And I thought I'll go back and do it again in 2017. I'd be 60 by the time that was taking place. And that's when disaster hit. Started training that year, and yeah.
Yeah, and just to go through that story, obviously, what we're talking about disaster was we're talking about your diagnosis, but how did that come about? And also, because I know this is one of the biggest things for you in terms of warning signs or people not ignoring little niggles and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. In the February, I was running the Anglesey Half Marathon, which starts on a really steep downhill. And as I planted my right foot to the ground, I got a searing pain through my groin. And this got progressively worse, but being a runner with a high pain threshold, as I've just explained, you carry on running through it, don't you? Take a few painkillers, and because we're idiots, basically. So I carried on taking a few painkillers. In the April, I ran the Paris and Manchester marathons a week apart as training runs for Comrades, did them in just under 3 hours 50, taking it reasonably steadily. And then when I got back from doing both those, I actually couldn't get my right leg out of the car when I was trying to get out of the car. It was just screamingly painful. So I made an appointment to see a sports injuries doctor on the 8th of May, and we'd prearranged an MRI scan. He saw the scan and said, something we weren't expecting to see. I want to rule out anything untoward. So I need you to have a blood test and a chest x-ray now. And tomorrow I'm sending you for a CT scan. So you can imagine that evening, Monday, the 8th of May, was terrifying. Cancer never crossed my mind. But then he phoned me up on the Tuesday evening, just as I was leaving running club, and told me that he was 99% certain I'd got prostate cancer. I then had to drive home to tell my wife, and I was in floods of tears all the way because, as far as I was concerned, it was a death sentence. And it was the most awful, awful period of my life. I can't tell you how horrendous it was. I was a sub-elite athlete training for an ultra marathon, and suddenly I was told I've got prostate cancer. Anyway, we had 10 days of further diagnostic tests, and it was confirmed it was advanced stage prostate cancer. The groin strain was actually stress fractures of the pelvis where the cancer had broken into the bones. And it turned out that the cancer at diagnosis was in my pelvis, hips, ribs, spine, neck, and skull. So everything from pelvis to skull, every bone had a tumour in it. And the day I should have flown to South Africa was the first day I met my oncologist. And my first question to him wasn't how long I've got left to live. It was, can I still run? and the answer was wonderful because he said, yes, you must, because the side effects of the treatment we're going to put you on will lead to loss of muscle mass and loss of bone density and weight gain. And if you don't exercise, it's going to be really bad for you and make all those things worse. So that was basically the big shock, and it's etched on my brain and will be forever.
Because I mean, you've sort of hinted very strongly on it there, but just to sort of absolutely spell this out for listeners, this was a diagnosis which was it's a terminal cancer, isn't it, that you've got? Did they put a time limit on it at the time?
Yeah.
It's been 5 years, hasn't it? So
yeah, 5.5 years now, and I was actually diagnosed 3 months before Bill Turnbull, who died about two months ago. And I was originally told I may only have 2 years to live. I've been one of the lucky ones that I've been able to respond to the treatment really well that I've been on. The treatment effectively, and this will shock a lot of the male listeners, is chemical castration, because prostate cancer feeds on testosterone. So they remove your testosterone, which basically turns you into a menopausal woman. And I'm actually much more sympathetic with menopausal women than I ever was before. But then you lose muscle mass, you lose bone density, you gain weight, and all those things are horrendous for a runner. And when my oncologist said, you carry on running, you must carry on running, but you'll be a lot slower, you won't be able to go as far. And he was absolutely right. All my times fell off the cliff.
But despite that, you did carry on running, and it wasn't straight down to saying, "Oh, I've got these issues. I'm just going to maybe jog around a park run or something." You continued to do some really long distances, and some even longer distances, I think, than you did before.
Yeah, I actually qualified for the London Marathon with a good for age time for an over 60 just before I was diagnosed. And I thought, shall I take it on or shall I not? And the harsh reality was that the training was really tough. I decided I would have a go. I knew it was going to be awful, and it was. But the training was tough because one of the big side effects is fatigue. And I'd go out for a training run thinking I was going to run 12 miles or 14 miles or whatever. And after 2 miles, I'd realised that this wall of fatigue was so horrible. I'd stop, turn around, walk back to base, and I'd be in floods of tears because cancer had robbed me of something that I loved and I enjoyed. And it took me a long time to get away from that. But I did London Marathon. I did a personal worst of 5 hours and 7. I raised £13,000 for Prostate Cancer UK. And then I've gone on to do a few other things as well.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that's an incredible amount of money to raise. I mean, in some ways, were you call it a personal worst in terms of times, but were you more proud of that marathon than you were perhaps of some of the ones previously?
I think I would say it's the marathon that I'm actually the most proud of, because it was in complete adversity. It was the hottest London marathon on record. And one of the other side effects is hot flushes and hot sweats. So having a hot flush and a hot sweat when it's 30 degrees when you're doing London Marathon was not ideal.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm very, very proud of that. And the following year, I've decided I need a challenge, something to motivate me to actually keep me going, keep me running. And the following year, I decided I was going to try and run 970 miles in the year. Now in the old days, that was a piece of cake because I was doing 1700 miles, but in the new world, it was really tough. And I can hear your mind whirring, thinking, why 970 and not 1,000? Yeah. So the 970 was the number of men that died every month of prostate cancer in the UK during that year. And I wanted to run 1 mile to commemorate each of those men. And by the end of the year, that had risen to 1,000. So very scary. So that was my next challenge. And I think one other thing I should just say was, when I was diagnosed, my wife asked the urologist, how long do you think Tony's had this prostate cancer growing? And he said, probably 10 years. So all my marathon career, my ultra marathon career, was with prostate cancer growing inside me. And I'd had no symptoms whatsoever.
And would there have been any way, I mean, I guess short of having, I don't know, a blood test or something during that 10 years, of them being able to give you an earlier diagnosis, which may or may not have led to a better prognosis in the end?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I do in my awareness talks is talk about getting tested early. And men over, I was appalled when I found out that I'd had a right to a PSA blood test from the age 50. Men over 50 have a right to this PSA test. It is the only way we can start the diagnostic process. And if I'd had a PSA test every year from 50 to 60, my cancer would have been caught early and it would have been cured. So prostate cancer caught early is completely curable. They treat it with curative intent. Unfortunately, once you're diagnosed stage 4 like me, there's no cure. All they're going to do is give you palliative care to keep you going, basically.
So definite message for people there. If you are, I mean, I'm 45, so obviously wouldn't quite be eligible for it yet. But I have to say, I've never heard of that at all previous to this conversation just now.
Yeah.
So I guess first of all, a really big message for people over 50 to make sure they get, or men over 50 to make sure they go and get that test. And then also, I suppose my next thought is how well publicized that is by the NHS, by doctors, and whether there needs to be improvement in that process.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't really publicised at all, because at the moment they won't screen with the PSA test because it isn't accurate enough as a diagnostic test. But the words I used before were, it's the start of the process. And historically, the next part of the process was a transrectal biopsy, which actually could lead to sepsis and death. So
Right.
they didn't like doing a PSA test because of that, but the diagnostic pathway has changed, and now we're in a situation where we don't do transrectal biopsies anymore. And so it makes the PSA test much more viable. What GP should do is talk to a man about the pros and cons. Of course, the worst con is someone like me who faces a premature, slow and painful death, effectively, because that's the harsh reality. Whereas early diagnosis equals curative intent, and people, in most cases, get back to leading a virtually normal life after they've had treatment for early stage prostate cancer.
So certainly something you'd be campaigning for, I suppose.
Well, that's what I won the award for last night, for being a campaigner for awareness. Yeah. I should also say that if you've got a family history, you should get tested from 45. And if you're a black man, you should get tested from 45, because the risk for black men is double the risk than for white men. And if you've got a family history, you're 2.5 times at greater risk because of the family history.
So just going back to the running, I'm guessing you made it and hit that 970 target. Did you find that a lot harder than previously?
I found it incredibly tough at the time, because I was really suffering with the side effects of the treatment. Those side effects have abated a little bit since, so I don't get the hot sweats and hot flushes as much as I did. fatigue is still a big problem. I battle fatigue every single day of my life. So no, it was a big battle to get to 970 miles. I did it with about 2 weeks to spare, and so I got there eventually. And then I think having done that, and that raised a load of money for charity as well, which was great. I decided I needed another challenge the following year, so and that's kept me going as well. So the following year, I decided I was going to try and run Race to the Castle, which is a 100-kilometer ultra marathon over 2 days. I couldn't do it over one day. And I say run because on the first day it was probably about 50-50, and on the second day it was zero running apart from the sprint finish.
Right.
but I finished it, and and that again raised a load of money for, I think I raised it for Macmillan and prostate cancer that year. So,
And for people who don't know, where's that event take place?
well, it's actually it was a one-off by the sounds of it, because it was Race to the Castle, finished at Bamber Castle up in the northeast. And it started out in the moors, in the Northampton moors, the Northumbrian moors, ran through the Forestry Commission, out to the coast, and all the way up the coast of Bamburgh Castle. But the organisers who run Race to the Stones, Race to the Kings, have said that they can't run it again. They had major problems with the forest there in the big storms we had earlier in the year, and most of the forest was destroyed, and so I've still not been able to open the route up, and apparently it looks like it was a one-off, one and only. So what a swan song to my ultramarathon career. The one and only Race to the Castle.
Oh, it sounds like it's a real shame actually, because it sounds like that would be a really sort of picturesque and enjoyable, if probably very tough route to do.
Well, actually, the first day was mainly through the forest and through the moors, and it was challenging. It was quite tough. The second day was basically all the way up the Northumbrian coast, and it was a glorious sunny day, and not mad hot, but it was warm, But the coastline is stunningly beautiful, and you finish at Bamburgh Castle, which of course is just unique. And so it was a monumental race. I ran it with a friend who. I'm a patient representative in Greater Manchester for an initiative called Prehab for Cancer, which gives exercise programs to people diagnosed with cancer to get them fit before treatment. And Kirsty, who's the person who runs that program, ran it with me. And I say ran it with me, she's about 30 years younger than me. And I let her go at halfway on the first day and said to her on the second day, you do it on your own and I'll meet you at the finish and buy you a beer. And that's exactly what we did.
Yeah.
So, walking the walk.
We spoke about that marathon when you straight after your diagnosis as being sort of your proudest marathon. I mean, how did you feel when you completed an ultra like that?
I didn't think I could do it. I mean, I have to say completely honestly, I never trained. I only trained up to half marathon distance. I only did that once or twice, but it was sheer bloody mindedness. I mean, just an incredible achievement. If I had to walk, I walked. I knew I could do it. I knew I could walk hard if I had to. And on the second day, I power walked at 4 miles an hour for about 7 hours. And that got me to the 28 miles I needed. But, walking at that rate is actually quite hard. It's very demanding. But I didn't have anything left for me to run. And my wife was out on the course, and she found me a few times with our dog, and walked with me, but she was struggling. So she was actually trotting while I was walking. So yeah, it was an amazing achievement. I'm incredibly proud of it. This year's achievement will be even bigger still, but we'll talk about that in a sec.
Yeah, I definitely want to get to that in a bit. But the one question I sort of wanted to ask you now was, as you've gone further from the diagnosis, have things become harder? Is it now harder for you to run than it was, say, I don't know, 6 months, a year afterwards? Are you deteriorating and are things becoming harder?
I think the effect of the treatment is cumulative. Weight gain, because I'm on steroids, which lead to weight gain. The treatment itself leads to weight gain, so you get this ring of visceral fat around your middle, and so I think it's got progressively harder. But it's one of those sort of self-fulfilling prophecies. If you don't do it, you get worse. So you've got to keep doing it, and that's what I try to do. I try to do as much as I can. So I run. At the moment, we'll talk about that in a bit, but, I'd run typically 4 days a week and do a fitness class for some core strength and upper body work. And I think it's absolutely vital for people living with advanced stage prostate cancer to actually keep as fit as possible. Everybody living with cancer. In fact, everybody, full stop. If exercise were a pill, we'd all be taking it.
Yeah, just how helpful has running and exercise been to you? I'm thinking not just in terms of your own fitness, but your mental health as well, because that must be
God,
tough at times too.
it, it's been massive. I think if I'd been told that I would be unable to run after my diagnosis, I might as well be dead. Because for me, the running was a massive, massive part of my life. My running club's a massive part of my life. I'm now a qualified coach. I coach to 5K. And so running was so important to me. And I was really pleased to get the encouragement from my oncologist to actually carry on running. And being told that you must do was actually a great catalyst. But yeah, it's got harder. I got to the point when I was over 2 stone heavier than my running weight when I was diagnosed. I've lost a little bit of that, so I'm probably 1.5 stone heavier. And as we all know, carrying a bit of excess weight as a runner makes running really, really tough. So
Mm.
yeah, it gets a bit harder. Of course, you could actually say, well, that's just because you're a bit older. I'm 5.5 years older as well. So that's another double whammy, isn't it, really?
You obviously really enjoy running, to be doing the distances you are, to keep going, for it to be keeping you going, I suppose. What is it that's so special about running?
I think it's that endorphin rush when you've completed a run. It might feel awful while you're doing it, but you feel fantastic when you finished it. And just to give you a flavour of what it feels like at the moment, my big problem is I take my cancer treatment at sort of 7 in the morning, and at 9 o'clock the fatigue is the worst imaginable. And I'll quite often go and lie in the bed for 20 minutes. I don't want to go to sleep because it's fatigue, it's not tiredness. And I force myself to put my running kit on and go out and do a run. And when I get back, I feel as if this veil of fatigue has been lifted from my body. So feel physically refreshed, rejuvenated, but actually mentally refreshed. And I think, without the running, the sort of dark place you go to with the cancer diagnosis would have been so much worse. If I couldn't run as well, I mean, it would have been awful. So running for me has just been therapeutic. I think it's actually there's only one other man that I know who's got a stage 4 diagnosis, who is a runner, and he said recently there were 20 men diagnosed a year either side of him. 18 of them are dead, 2 of us are still alive, and I was the other one. So that basically just sort of sums it up, really. He thinks that running is keeping us both alive, and I think it's contributing to it, certainly.
Yeah, in fact, I was almost going to go down that road, because I was thinking, obviously, you said at the start about Bill Turnbull and him being around, diagnosed around the same time as you, and obviously, sadly, having passed away recently. And it sort of made me think this thing running seems to have helped you in terms of longevity.
I think it absolutely has. It's not all of it. I mean, part of it is responding really well to the treatment. When I was diagnosed, they measure how things are by the PSA level. PSA stands for prostate specific antigen. The prostate kicks that out into your blood, and it kicks more of it out as you get older because your prostate gets bigger. And for someone my age, my PSA should have been no more than 4 when I was diagnosed, and it was 129. And I started on this hormone therapy virtually immediately. I'm on 2 forms of hormone therapy, one by daily tablet and one by an injection into the stomach. And it brought my PSA down to unrecordable inside 7, 8 months. And it's stayed there now for over 4 years. When the treatment starts to fail, my PSA will start to rise. So I have 12 weekly blood tests that I also call squeaky bum time, because I'm nearer to the test where they tell me the treatment has failed than I was at the start. So, it's always at the back of your mind that it's going to come back. And yeah, you have to live with that. That's tough. Running helps. I mean, it really does. When you get into that deep anxiety because squeaky bum time's coming along, the fact that you go out for a run and just lift that anxiety is just phenomenal.
Yeah, and does the campaigning help as well in terms of a sense of purpose?
Absolutely. I think when you're diagnosed with cancer, the first thing you do is you lose a little bit of self-esteem, and you lose body image. I've got a man with boobs, and I've got this ring of fat around my stomach, and I look like Mr. Blobby again. And so you lose self-esteem, you lose body image. And the campaigning for me is a way of doing good, and it helps me feel better about myself. And obviously the running helps me to try to maintain the weight and, keep the boobs down to the bare minimum. I think I don't quite need a trainer bra yet, but it's getting there. But yeah, so yeah, absolutely. Campaigning is a big plus for me.
So we're here with 2022. What is this year's big challenge?
I mean, at the start of the year, this is ridiculous. I was asked by the BBC, they needed a Christmas filler last Christmas, and they asked me if I could do an interview about living with prostate cancer and being a runner. I thought, of course I can, of course I can. And the interviewer said to me, and what's your next challenge going to be? And I hadn't even thought about it. So I just said, I think I might try to run at least 5K every day in 2022. And of course, they broadcast it. My wife has now banned me from doing interviews. Don't say anything that you might later regret. And of course, anyway, here I am. We're 300 plus days into the challenge, and I'm doing it for the Move charity. And the Move charity basically support teenagers and young adults living with cancer to get them moving again, because movement is so important. And they're also behind 5K Your Way, which is an initiative linked to parkrun at about 80 something parkruns around the UK, where we come together on the last Saturday of the month to basically do 5K our way, which for most of these cancer patients means walking. And so, yeah, I set out to do that. I've run so far this year, just actually totted it up, 1,156 miles so far this year. So by the time I finish it, it'll probably be pushing 1,400, maybe 1,500 miles. So I didn't think I could do that. I still don't think I can do that. I am absolutely shattered. I used to be 6'6". I'm lost about a foot. So yeah, it's been a real tough challenge. But again, I'm just shy of £10,000 on my fundraising, which is incredible.
Well, I was going to say we'll make sure we get the link off of you and put that in the show notes, and see if we can't get a few other people sticking some pennies in.
That's very kind.
The BBC have kind of ruined my finishing question there, because I was going to ask you as
what's the next challenge?
What's next? Yeah.
Yeah, well, people keep saying to me, what next? And I really think next year is probably going to be one of those where I just get back to club running. What I would actually like to do, and I have sort of running things I want to try to get back to achieving. So I think I've probably done my bit as far as, ridiculous challenges are. I'm 66 in February. It's not getting any easier to do this sort of stuff. I don't think I'll be doing any endurance stuff in the future, but I would like to sort of focus on getting a bit quicker at parkrun, and a bit quicker at doing some 5K races. I was a sub 20-minute 5K runner at my prime, and before my diagnosis, I was easily running 21s and 22s, and I think I should still be running 24s if I weren't ill. But actually, I can't get under 27 at the moment, so I'd like to get under 27 again. Yeah. So that's a big challenge, and I think I'll just focus on that really and see if I can improve those times at that short distance.
And just finally, just to finish off, what would kind of be your message to anyone who gets the same shocking news that you got 5 years ago? I'm guessing it would be go out and running can help you, I suppose.
Well, I think fitness, exercise, movement, I don't even call it running really. Movement is so important. So keep moving. That might be walking, it might just be anything that gets your heart rate elevated. Big fan of, even for people who are really struggling with mobility, to do chair-based exercise. Sit to stand, for example, is a great exercise. It uses lots of different muscle classes. So try and stay as fit as possible by movement. That's really important. But what I would say is, and I'd say this to everybody, not just people living with a dread illness, it's really important that you live every day to the full and get the most out of every minute of every day. I spent the first 18 months thinking about dying, and then I realized that you shouldn't forget about the joy of living through the fear of dying. And so that would be my big message. Don't forget about the joy of living through the fear of dying. I think it's such a strong, powerful message. And I try to get a bit out of every day. I've got 4 grandchildren now. I only had 1 when I was diagnosed. I love spending time with them, and I love the joy of life. And I think just live life to the full and love every minute of it.
Oh, well, I think that's just a tremendous message for everyone, whatever situation they might be in, Tony. So a really good place for us to leave it today. Thank you so much for your time and for coming on Running Tales.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today on the Running Tales podcast. If you like what we do, please follow us on Facebook. Our page is called Running Tales, or on Twitter at Running Tales Pod. We'd also really appreciate it if you could leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple and Spotify, anywhere else. Those reviews make more people find the podcast and listen to the wonderful stories of the people we have on there. That's all for this week, and we look forward to seeing you on next week's Running Tales podcast.